I'm focused on making sure that we can launch our recovery plan, Stronger BC, so that British Columbians have confidence that we're focused on their needs.
We are in the midst of a global pandemic. There are rising COVID cases. The government extended the state of emergency as of yesterday. There is no need to have an election at this time. And in fact, what the Premier needs to be focused on is ensuring that the health and well-being and safety of everybody in this province is first and foremost in his mind.
That was British Columbia Premier John Horgan speaking just last hour. As you heard, he would not definitively say if he's going to call an election 1 year earlier than planned. Speculation has been swirling that he plans, though, to do just that. And feeding into the speculation, about 50 minutes ago, former federal MP Nathan Cullen announced that he is running for the BC NDP. So is his former caucus colleague Murray Rankin. Horgan's NDP minority government has been in power since 2017, essentially propped up by the Greens, but recent polling suggests Horgan's popularity has soared, meaning he could be in a position to nab a majority. The opposition parties, as you heard the new Green leader there, are strongly against a snap election. Yesterday we spoke to Sonia Furstenau. Now we are joined by Andrew Wilkinson, the leader of the BC Liberal Party. He's in Vancouver. Hi, Mr. Wilkinson. Good to see you. Thank you for making time.
Well, thanks for having me.
So Premier Horgan, again, would not say whether there's going to be an election. He did not give a definitive answer. Do you read that as there will be one?
Well, it's very hard to say because the decision's in his mind, and yet we have the context that we're in the middle of a pandemic. Today we saw an all-time high of new COVID cases, an all-time high of active COVID cases in British Columbia. We've got 120,000 people out of work in this province since COVID came along, and yet the NDP and John Horgan seem to be preoccupied with finding a window to guarantee their job security. So it's very disappointing to see that this is their priority at a time like this.
Is it necessarily their priority, or are they doing something that just happened in New Brunswick and could potentially happen federally? They're consulting, my understanding is, or at least they're not consulting, but I should say that the health authority there, Dr. Bonnie Henry, is looking at the possibility of a safe election. So far, there's no red flags raised. Is it really, such a bad thing for the pandemic that they would do this?
Well, Elections BC and Dr. Henry are doing their duty in case there is an election called, but let's look at the context again. Agreement with the NDP that lasts for another year. There is no need for an election under any circumstances, and the priority, as we said in the spring, is fighting the virus, not fighting each other. So it seems to be a very strange set of priorities for John Horgan to say, gee, if there's a bump in the polls, maybe I should jump in and trigger an election, when they should be governing, not looking for job security.
Conversely, I take your point, Mr. Wilkinson, that of course, everyone is worried about the health of British Columbians right now. Are you also, from a political standpoint, worried about entering into election when John Horgan has seen such a bump in the polls?
Well, these polls come and go, as we know. There was one about 6 weeks ago that had us 2 points apart. And so if you want to read the polls and try to get out your surfboard, and you could fall in the ocean and get a rude surprise. So our priority, of course, is to serve the interests of the people of British Columbia. That's why we supported the NDP budget in the summertime, which provided a big boost for investment and spending in British Columbia. But today we found out that, in fact, it's largely a transfer between levels of government and to the health authorities, leaving precious little for businesses and individuals. In fact, if you're the average person who's been unemployed because of this pandemic in British Columbia, you look at their economic plan, and there's absolutely nothing in it for the average British Columbian. So that is a disappointment. Folks here are already saying that in British Columbia, so we wouldn't be surprised if they'd back off this idea of an election. First of all, because the COVID count is going up very rapidly, like never before, and secondly, because their economic plan has fallen quite flat.
Have you had any conversations with the Premier about the potential for an election? Express your views to him personally?
No, the last time I spoke with him about a year ago. He's not someone who encourages conversation with me for reasons you can make your own conclusions about. But, in our world here of politics, there's another year to go on the agreement between the Greens and the NDP. There is no reason to call an election except for advantage for John Horgan. And what we're hearing throughout British Columbia, all over the province, is people are saying, stop looking out for your own skin and worry about the people of British Columbia. There are 5 million of us trying to get back on our feet, trying to make sure we're safe, trying to get the schools running again. And here we have John Horgan, who's sole preoccupation is whether he can keep his job.
Do you really think that that's the impression of British Columbians, that the Premier is kind of not having their back during this pandemic? And I ask you only because, and I'm no expert on politics in your province, but I certainly have seen, and I know you kind of dismissed the polls, but there have been a number of them that show such a high level of approval for the Premier based on the actions he took in the pandemic. Do people in your province really feel that he doesn't have their back?
Well, I think approval is a very different thing from voting intention. I think we all know that. And leaders around the world have had high approval ratings. And that's because there's so much in the news, there's so much to be done. It's a time for government to be at the forefront. And yet, when it's time to look after the average British Columbian with the economic plan today, there's precious little in there that helps anybody who's lost their job. And so people start to say, well, why are we having an election now? I mean, our media in BC are calling it needless, unwarranted, totally inappropriate. We're getting a lot of pushback, and it's not just from us, it's from regular people throughout the province and also the local media.
If you were in the Premier's shoes from a strategic perspective and you saw the numbers that he's looking at, would you consider a snap election?
Well, you got to remember, I'm a medical doctor. I trained that way. The primary duty is to the health of the patient, and there are 5 million people in British Columbia. That's the primary duty right now, is to look out for the health and well-being of the British Columbia public. And when we see an all-time record of new cases today and an all-time record of active cases, that's a time to buckle down, get focused on your priorities, and the priority has to be the health and well-being of British Columbians, followed on, of course, by what's the economic future hold for British Columbians. There is mass unemployment in parts of our economy, and those people need to have a sense of confidence and security in their future, and that is not in any way supported by triggering an election to suit John Horgan's needs.
But if a BC election says it will be safe, it won't negatively affect the health and the future of British Columbians, why is it such a bad thing?
Well, remember, the duration of election is anywhere from 28 to 35 days. That's a long time when you see the graph today going through the roof of new cases, when we have 600,000 kids back in school, and we know that there is the risk of spread through the school system that has to be carefully managed. This is not a time to look out for John Horgan's pension plan. This is a time to look out for the health of British Columbians and their economic health in the longer term, which is what we'll be focused on. We've been very much on the view that we should be fighting the virus, not fighting each other on the health side of things since March. And we're also now focusing much more on the economic health of British Columbia and the chance for people to get back on their feet after this huge economic hit. That's where the focus needs to be, not on triggering an election, which means effectively no government for about 50 days, while we're going through this massive growth in the viral count in British Columbia, more people falling in, our hospital count is rising rapidly. This is not a time to look out for John Horgan's career path.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. Appreciate you making time for our show this evening.
Thanks very much. Good to speak.
Andrew Wilkinson is the leader of BC's Liberal Party. Yesterday, I spoke to the newly elected leader of BC's Green Party about the possibility of a snap election. She just won her party's leadership on Monday. Here's my conversation with Sonia Furstenau. Hi, Ms. Furstenau. Good to welcome you to the program, and congratulations on your win.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
I appreciate you making the time. I know that following your win, you really soon after expressed your kind of dismay at the possibility of this election. In fact, you said it would be irresponsible. I want to just put to you what the Prime Minister said on the possibility of a federal election today. He said, I think it's irresponsible to say that an election would be irresponsible. Our country and our institutions are stronger than that. And if there has to be an election, we'll figure it out. Do you think that statement holds up in BC? Do you think people in BC would figure it out?
So the point is, there doesn't have to be an election. We just came through a summer session. The budget was passed. There is stable government in this province. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. There are rising COVID cases. The government extended the state of emergency as of yesterday. There is no need to have an election at this time. And in fact, what the Premier needs to be focused on is ensuring that the health and well-being and safety of everybody in this province is first and foremost in his mind. Kids are back in school. Parents are anxious. Teachers and education assistants are anxious. We need the ministers of health and the Minister of Education to be focused on working with our provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, and navigating through what seems to be an increasingly high number of COVID cases and hospitalizations, and not unnecessarily on the campaign trail, asking people for money and votes at a time when people are worried about their health and well-being.
So I should say that the Premier has not conclusively said that there'll be an election. It's just that he hasn't said there won't be. And so as a result, there's a ton of speculation. On Monday, he said, we've been preparing for the eventuality of one. I'm going to focus on the here and the now. My number one priority is the well-being of British Columbians. So to your point around, the focus should be on the pandemic and the persisting state of emergency, he seems aware of that.
Yeah, and it's not only that, it's also on the recovery. It's on the fact that this legislature approved a budget that includes a recovery plan to get started in British Columbia right now. And we contributed enormously to the foundations of that recovery plan in that in our collaboration with the government, we're talking about the need to create immediate employment opportunities across BC, especially for young people, to look at resilience in our communities so that we are not only getting more prepared for future emergencies, but also working to avert them. For example, getting rid of fuel load in forests across this province as we are all choking on the orange smoke that has blanketed southern BC for the last several days. We're looking at the need to increase social supports, especially looking at early childhood education, ensuring that women can get back into the workforce because this has hit women and marginal communities harder than anybody else. There's so much work to be done. There's a plan for that, and this government needs to move forward and do that work.
I certainly take your point on all of that. And I hope you'll forgive me for asking kind of a crude political question. But if you were in John Horgan's shoes and it was your party that looked like it had a majority at the tip of its fingers for the first time after, 3 years of working in a minority kind of very unique situation with the Greens, would you be as conclusive as you are right now? Or would you be thinking, hey, this might be our opportunity to win the majority mandate that we really think we should win?
I got into politics out of wanting to be in service to my community. I worked with my community for 4 years to get a permit revoked for a contaminated landfill in our drinking watershed in Shawnigan, a permit that the former provincial government had issued. I ran to be MLA to fix the broken system that had resulted in that permit being issued in the first place, with an enormous conflict of interest at the heart of it, the system of professional reliance. And I run for leader as for the BC Greens because I think we need more politicians who put service to people and to citizens ahead of politics. We have collaborated in this legislature for 3 years to deliver fantastic results for this province. We have worked across all three parties this year because of COVID to show what collaboration and cooperation can deliver in an emergency when people put aside partisanship and put the well-being of the citizens first. This is what needs to continue. This is what I would be doing in his shoes without any doubt.
So I think I can anticipate then your answer to my next kind of crude political question. And that is that your party and you as an MLA have worked very, I think most Canadians can see from the outside, pretty well with the NDP, right? In that you have been able to govern together to a certain degree through this agreement. When you think about kind of the way in which that has all transpired, do you have any regret, I guess, maybe not regret, but are you bitter at all that, this has catapulted John Horgan to much higher levels of popularity and puts him in a position to win a majority, but your party at this point at least doesn't seem to have benefited in the same way?
I feel no bitterness whatsoever for the excellent programs and services and infrastructure that has been delivered for the people of British Columbia in these last 3 years. What I also would say that differentiates us from the NDP is that we did oppose repeatedly in the House their decision to add significant billions of dollars in fossil fuel subsidies in the way of tax credits and breaks to LNG Canada. We would not continue with a program that subsidizes the oil and gas industry. And I point to, again, the smoke that much of Canada now is coping with as an example of why we need to focus on a transition very quickly. And we need to be looking forward to the future that we want to build, to the resilient communities where people can thrive in their communities, where small businesses and education are at the center of our communities, where infrastructure exists for public transit, for walkable communities, for better connectivity. And we need to get moving on that immediately. And I'm going to continue to work on that regardless. And I really do call on this premier, because there is a budget and a plan to do this work immediately, and it needs to start right now.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Ms. Furstenau. I really appreciate you making the time for our program tonight, and congratulations again on your win.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Sonia Furstenau is BC's Green Party, the new leader of the BC's Green Party. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.